This is such a nice crowd. I'm Maura. This is Ben. Ben runs Canary. That's Cal. Cal runs Canary. Thanks, Ben and Cal. Yeah. So this is what I was planning on doing, just to give you guys a sense of it. I wanted to talk a little bit about some sort of additional research. Well, first I want to just make sure that everyone understands how to launder money, because I want you to get your money's worth here. So first I thought I would go over that. Couple pieces of additional research that just kind of didn't make it into the film that I thought were interesting. Then Ben is going to ask 3 questions.
3 questions.
And then we can have a conversation. And you can also feel free to just interrupt me and talk to me, because I don't, I'm not weird about stuff like that. But also I'll just launch right into it. So this film's called Offshore. I have been working on it for several years, so it's really exciting to be here with you guys. And thank you so much for coming and watching it. It was a lot of work, so I'm now gonna sleep for like a month and then do something else. So I showed this video to like a class, like a UCLA class, and at the end of it, one of the girls was like, I'm not sure that I understand how to launder money. So it's actually not that complicated. So I thought I would just kind of like go back to the diagram and really quick run through it for you. So there are 3 stages. And basically all it is you're just trying to create distance, right? Like you're trying to put as much distance as possible between this sort of pile of dirty money and yourself. So the first stage is called placement, and that's just like you have a bunch of money, you have to like divide it up into manageable amounts. A lot of people, I'm told, use cashier's checks at this point, so you get sort of irregularly sized cashier's checks. Really simple. The second stage is the complicated stage and the exciting stage, which is called layering. And that's where you create like a legal mechanism to produce a sort of more distant relationship between you and the money. Usually you're going to do that through a shell corporation, or better yet, a series of shell corporations that cross over international borders, so that if somebody's trying to trace you back, right, like they have to go through different laws in different jurisdictions, which may not play ball. So you want, so that's ideal. If you've got a lot of money and you're really doing it, that's how you would ideally do it. And then the last part is integration, and this is where the art comes in. So you take your corporate architecture, you open a bank account, and then you buy something. And a lot of times people legitimately do buy art. It's a really excellent choice. I got interested in this work because I was, a long time ago, interested in Paul Manafort, who I don't know if you remember him, but he's a famous money launderer. And he was laundering through art. He was also laundering through real estate. He was laundering through like Persian rugs, But objects that, retain their value or have a high value, they're small, they're transportable, that's like ideal. And so art is great. Art also sort of, has the whiff of class, and so it gives you a sort of feeling of legitimacy, which is important. So you buy an artwork, and then you sell an artwork. Some people also do this with like diamonds and precious metals. And I was talking to this guy who told me that he knew someone who would do this for you. Some people wouldn't let me put them in the film, and this person was one of them. And he said that there are people who will just literally take a fee and just buy and sell diamonds from you, right? And so anyways, you can sort of do that with art too, with certain kinds of galleries or auction houses. You buy something, you sell it, and then you've got all of a sudden an invoice, and you can account for where your wealth came from, and that's it. That's what money laundering is.
But money laundering is only when the money is illegal.
Yes.
So it has to start illegal, whereas tax evasion is somewhat similar.
Yes.
But with real money.
Yes, yeah. So money laundering and tax evasion, very similar, but with tax evasion, your funds could be illegal if you wanted, or not. It's up to your choice, yeah. But yes, money laundering technically starts with illegal money. So I got really excited. Obviously, like the interesting part of money laundering is the layering. So it's the creation of these shell corporations. And to me, that was interesting because as I was sort of talking to people about this and doing this research, it seemed like, oh, this is this moment where lawyers and accountants become kind of like artists, and there's this sort of creativity in these corporate structures and how you name them, and it's like complicated and sort of erudite. And so that was sort of the thing that I was most interested in, and I wanted to share something with you. So the gentleman, the only person who's actually named who let me use his real name is Oliver Bullough, who you see several times. He's the guy with the British accent. And he's a wonderful journalist, and he wrote a book called Moneyland, which was really influential to this project, and which I highly recommend. And so there's this beautiful section in Moneyland that really got me interested in the idea of money laundering. It's just a little paragraph, and so I thought I would read it to you. So he's talking about a company in the UK called Formations House. It used to be called Formations House, and then I just looked it up, and it turns out they've rebranded, and now that they're called the London office, possibly because of Oliver's book. They're a company mill, so they just are a company that makes other companies for people. They've made, Wikipedia says they've made 450,000 companies, I don't know as of when. And they make companies in the UK, but they also make them in the Caymans and the Seychelles and all of these different tax havens. So Oliver is talking about this particular corporate architecture that he discovered that was created by Formations House. Kel, could you forward the slide for me, please? Thank you. Okay. In February 2004, Formations House created 3 companies: corporate nominees, legal nominees, and professional nominees. One thing that's really good to know, just an interruption, one thing that's really great to know about if you're thinking about doing this is you should try to name your companies things that are as banal as possible. You do not want an exciting corporate name. You want, better yet, just a string of random numbers and letters, really, you don't want anything that could be tied back to you. Okay, so next slide, please. Thank you. The second company owned the other 2, while itself being owned by the third company. Next slide. The third company was the secretary of the other 2, while its own secretary was the first company. Next slide. Thank you. The second company was the director of the other 2, while its own director was the first company. These 3 companies then became directors, secretaries, and shareholders of other structures, which in turn owned others. If you stopped and traced your way along the chain of ownership, you eventually ended up at the central triumvirate with their elegant circular ownership structure. And the most you could say about them was that they all owned, controlled, and managed each other, right? So there's this very kind of beautiful, really kind of elegant and artistic, abstract relationship between these companies. So I thought that was delightful, and I just wanted to share it with you. Okay, another thing I want to say. So this film is called Offshore, and it really focuses on these offshore jurisdictions, these tax havens, that I became interested in outside of this project. But I wanted to say, just for the record, that the idea of being offshore really is not, the word offshore makes it sound like, warm beaches and tropical locations, which some of it is. But offshore is really a legal status. It's not really tied to a particular geography. So, in the video I talk about how, there are these sort of 2 geographic poles. One is the European Benelux countries, and we see Switzerland, and the other is, the former British Empire that really provides financial services to the city of London. There really is a third geographic pole. Those 2 are kind of the most historic, but there's a third, which is the United States, which, because of the federal system, serves as an offshore jurisdiction to itself. So you have states like Delaware, most famously, but also Wyoming and Nevada, which serve as offshore jurisdictions to other states. I just thought it was important to say that this is just not something that's just happening over there in some vague way, but it's also something that we're doing here. And, our country has, I think deliberately somewhat set up areas in which the laws, you can break laws legally, right? There are these sort of loopholes. If you have enough money, you can sort of take advantage of these differences between jurisdictions. If you're interested in more information about that, there's another wonderful book, a person who I also spoke to for this project but didn't end up in the film, named Casey Anderson, who wrote a book called American Kleptocracy, which is all about the rise of offshore jurisdictions in the United States. Whew, okay. So, Ben just mentioned tax evasion.
Yes.
I want to go back to the idea of tax evasion. When I was working on this project, I got really interested in tax evasion because, and Oliver refers to it in the film, it really employs the exact same sort of legal mechanisms that money launderers use. And one thing is that money laundering and tax evasion both happen in the art world regularly, all the time. But money laundering does tend to be associated with like drug cartels. And so the sort of immediate effects of its violence are felt most directly in the global south, not here. In the United States, tax evasion is the thing that we feel most directly. It's kind of the primary violence that's occurring. And I think, it's not as sexy as money laundering. So, I could have redone this project and made it about tax evasion, but I don't know if I would have gotten all the grant money because money laundering just sounds so good. And, everyone likes it. And it has this Hollywood, it has this sort of Hollywood cachet, right? It's what gets depicted. But I think that tax evasion is doing a very significant amount of damage here in the United States, and functions in a very, very similar way. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, here we go. Actually, I forgot about this slide. This is offshore jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I just wanted to give one example. This was in the news a little while ago, so maybe some of you have heard about it, but I think it's exciting, so I thought I'd bring it up, and they're still up to it. So one of the ways that tax evasion works sometimes, it works in all different ways, but one example is if you buy an artwork and you don't want to pay sales tax on the artwork, there is a loophole where you can send the artwork to be exhibited at a museum in a state that doesn't have sales tax or use tax. And if you send it, because tax is accrued when an artwork is sent to you, when you receive it. So if you send it directly to be exhibited, you don't have to pay that tax if there's no sales tax where it's being shown. So in Oregon, the Portland Museum of Art does this all the time, but also there's this sort of funny story about the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, which is a smaller museum in Eugene, Oregon. And they actually have a curatorial program around this tax loop. It used to be called, what did it used to be called? They rebranded also because they got some bad press. But it still exists on their website. I took this screenshot yesterday. It used to be called Masterworks on Loan. And now it's called Shared Visions. And, and they say on their website, some lenders may receive. So basically they're like, please send us your stuff and we'll show it, and then you get this tax benefit. And it says some lenders may receive tax benefits for participating in our Shared Visions program and should consult a tax advisor to learn more. So there's this funny, there was a New York Times article about this a while ago, this produces this funny thing where there'll be this very high-end art in this tiny museum, and then sort of randomly artwork sort of randomly, because it's just people avoiding taxes. It's not actually curated, right? So anyways, I just thought that was funny. Okay, next slide, please. This is my next thing. This is my last tidbit for you. Inigo Philbrick, recently out of prison as of a month ago. I'm sure some of you know who he is. He's committed the largest art fraud in U.S. history. He did some prison time. He went on the lam, and then he did some prison time. They caught him. He went to Vanuatu, which is a small island, without extradition to the U.S. They brought him back. He did some prison time. Now he's out of prison. He's got an $87 million judgment against him. He had a profile in Vanity Fair to mark he's back. I think he's going to have an HBO special, so stay tuned. He says he's working on a payment plan for the $87 million, and he's going to get back into art dealing to pay that off. So I wanted to just give you an example of what he was doing, because it's very instructive. So this is one example. He did this all the time with multiple artworks. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a Basquiat painted in 1982 called Humidity, I believe. Yeah, Humidity. Philbrick purchased this painting at Phillips Auction House through a company called Inigo Philbrick Limited, IPL. He purchased it in a private sale, so it was secret, which is perfectly legal in the art world, for $12.5 million. That's in July 2016. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so then in August 2016, the next month, he entered into a contract with a guy named Alexander Pesco, who was representing a company called Sat Finance Investment Limited. And he told Pesco that they were going to purchase this Basquiat, which he already owned, unbeknownst to Pesco, right? But they were going to enter into a joint agreement to purchase it 50-50 for now $18.4 million. Okay, next slide. So they did that. And then in November 2016, he met another guy named Damien Delahanty, who I think is an art dealer. And he told Delahanty that he had actually purchased the painting himself already. He didn't talk about these guys, Sat Finance, but he told them he had purchased it himself already for $22 million. And he sold Delahanty a 12.5% stake in the painting for $2.75 million. Okay, next slide, please. So now he forms another company called 18 Boxwood Limited, which is a shell company that was incorporated in Jersey, not New Jersey, but Jersey. And he entered into, with this shell company, he entered into an agreement with a art lending organization, which is when you use art as a collateral for a loan, called the Athena Finance Corporation. And so he entered into an agreement to get just a general $10 million line of rotating credit from Athena based on a rotating pool of artworks. So that would be the collateral, would be a pool of artworks. Next slide, please. Okay, you can't really see this down here, but that says Athena, and there's a little loop, which is my way of signifying loan has occurred. So then in April 2017, he added the Basquiat to the Athena pool of collateral, and he was able to secure an additional $3.5 million on the Basquiat alone. That's it. That's what he did with this painting, but he did this other times with other paintings. So, I think that this is a really instructive example of the principle of asymmetry of information, which Matthew talks about in the video, right? Like, what can you do because you are the only one who has the real information? And he did present like doctored contracts to people, although they weren't doctored very well. Like frequently they were unsigned, and people were kind of like, sure, okay. And so, but because nobody had access to that first sale through Phillips, no one knew who actually was the owner of the painting or how much money had been spent. The other thing that this illustrates is just, the incredible subjective, flexible value of art. Like, is the painting worth $12.5 million or is it worth $22 million? In a period of 9 months, he convinces somebody that the painting is worth double what he initially paid for it, right? So when I was talking to somebody I talked to for this piece who was a former auction house person, what she told me is, there's no, the person who wins the auction is the biggest sucker because they're the person who's willing to pay the most for it, right? And that's the only meaning of that. That's where it begins and ends. Okay, that's it. That's the end of my my facts. Thank you for listening. Ben.
Sure. All right. Well, we really want this to be like an open discussion, but to kick this off, I prepared 3 questions to kind of start the conversation going. So to start this, I'd like to take it back to the start. I've been with you on this project for quite some time, and I know you've been working on it even before we started showing at Canary. But what I'm curious to learn is, where did your interest in money and art begin, and was there a particular experience that sparked this body of work? Maybe even going back before you started your first video, was there something that maybe sparked it, or that you kind of went back and started thinking about that led to this work?
Yeah. People keep sort of asking me, like, why are you doing this? And to me, like, money is the most interesting thing in the world, and so why aren't we all making art about money? It's like a really good subject. I'm also like very interested in contradiction and triangulation and experiences like when you think you're doing one thing and you do another thing. Like that's something that's really interesting to me. You know, like I feel like a lot of my mental health is wrapped up in making art, you know, like sometimes I like to tell myself, oh, I could quit doing this at any time, you know, and then I'll sort of actually try to quit doing it, and it doesn't go that well. I end up like sort of crying over drinks with my friends, and then I'm like, oh man, I have to go back to therapy. So, you know, so but I do think that creativity is a kind of fundamental human right, and so I'm really compelled to make art, but also I have this awareness that, you know, making art has led me to make like really stupid financial decisions personally all the time. And also that it's, you know, like, you know, whether you like it or not, like we're all sort of locked into this bigger thing called, you know, global finance. And your position, even if you're an artwork that never sells, like you're an important sort of cog in that machine that is the art market, right? Like your position is bolstering the position of somebody else, you know? So there's really no outside of it. And so you end up in this situation where the sort of structures of inequity that have made, you know, your life bad, like the big structures of inequity, you know, you're making objects which are then going out into the world and are contributing to those structures pretty directly. And so I think that kind of sort of catch-22 is a fertile place to make work from. I also want to say, I want to call out something that Brody said to me. Brody's back there. When I was talking to him about this project, because it like rings in my ears. Like I just think it's really true, which is, you know, when we're kids, if you grow up in like a kind of middle class background or a working class background, like your experience with art is you encounter it in a museum and there's no price tag on the wall, you know, and it's this beautiful thing which just seems like maybe you went there on a school trip, and it's like about education and creativity, and then you become an artist and you go to art school and you know, figure out more about what's actually going on, you know, over years. And that really, you know, like art is, you know, art, we sort of imprint on art in one way. We have this emotional relationship to it, but it's also just high-end retail at the end of the day. And so, you know, you never forget, but you never forget that sort of initial impression that you have. It always sort of, that glimmer of that thing sort of stays with you. And so I think in a lot of ways this work is about trying to come to terms with like the sort of sadness of the loss of that thing, or at least to sort of bridge those two sort of poles of experience in my mind in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's like a underlying fact of art is that it's a very fractal viewing experience, right? Like the same work that's presented here for us to talk about and have these discussions and questions is in the same light, you know, being presented as an item for collectors to purchase, and also as an object for museums to archive. And I think kind of as a segue to that, when I was watching Offshore for the first time, I was kind of thinking about, okay, if I was in these different positions, like if I was like a major collector watching this video, or if I was laundering money and I was watching this video, or if I was an artist and I was watching this video, how would I react to Offshore? Like what would be my reaction to it in these different shoes? And so my next question is did you make this work for a particular audience? And if so, who?
I made it for artists. I'm assuming that's most of you people look like that, look like you're artists. Yeah, I made it really specifically. I don't always think of that, but when I was working on this film, I was like, this is for artists. I'm doing this for artists. And it kind of kept me going. I had a horrible insomnia. That's some of why I'm climbing on the table and sleeping. And it's because I was having just awful insomnia while I was working on this. And I ended up getting in a car accident because of it. It was like really brutal. But I was like, I'm making it for artists, you know, and it kind of got me through. And I, you know, one of the things that I wanted to do is just kind of, in the work is to maybe just sort of say things that we don't say in artworks all the time, like we might say to each other in different ways, or maybe not, you know, like the sort of trying to be creative in this sort of low resource environment, and all the kind of like shame and anger and competition that produces. Like I wanted to kind of, I wanted to name that as a shared experience, because I felt like it was, I don't know, because I felt it was weighing on me, and I felt like it was honest. And I also want to say that, you know, the people who have helped me in my career, who enable me to make art, have almost exclusively been other artists. And so I think, like, you know, despite the fact that we're all working in this really brutal system, like, other artists are amazing and incredibly generous to each other. So that's what it's for. Yeah.
That's nice. I mean, I think on that note, my final question really has to do with some of the other artists that were involved in this video, and in particular the score of this work, which was just amazing to listen to. And really what I'd like to actually do is invite the composer here, Michael Webster, up to join us. And I would really just like to hear, I think we'd all love to hear a little bit about your guys' collaboration and process. I know you've been working with each other for 10 plus years or more.
We have. We met a billion years ago when Carrie was, when Maura was Carrie Tribe's assistant. I was doing some things for Carrie.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, Maura sort of hit me up to, work on a film. She said, I've got this film, I've got this animation of microorganisms who are turning into oil, and I want them to sing a light opera in the style of Gilbert and Sullivan. Hell yeah. So yeah, I knew more back then, and then I've actually, we've worked together on a million films. Most recently, Maura, she did a series of films that were sort of based on other films, the Jessica Chastain movies, for example, and which were kind of edited. They were essay films using other films as raw material and then offering a commentary, and they give you this kind of crazy, uncanny experience where you're sort of watching cinema, and then you're pulled back from it to understand that it's being critiqued, and then the new cinema that's cutting those pieces together with the criticism is cinema, right? And then so trying to make music trying to first use the music in the Jessica Chastain movies and figure out how to sort of build a new rhythm that sort of could support what I felt was sort of like joy of the cutting in the movie was a super fun thing to do. And this was kind of threatening in a way because there was no Jessica Chastain.
I know.
There was no
harder.
Yeah, there was no found material to begin with or to create distance from. There was just nothing. So Maura asked me, she wanted to have something to cut to. We had actually also done a fashion show together where I'd made many small songs. So she had an experience. She said, I'd like to do something with a lot of music. So that makes me happy because I like to make music. A lot of artists are either don't hear music or are afraid of music or are afraid that music might grab their show and sort of push it in a direction that they don't want. So there's a lot of, you kind of keep your head down to try to make a perfume rather than so as not to terrify but Maura, on the other hand, actually wanted some stuff. And Maura asked me originally just for the tropical theme. And I knew what the show was about, so I was oriented, and I think I had even seen some samples, and so I kind of wrote a little tropical theme. And the goal writing it was to make something that would be like something that was found, right? So it would seem kind of like just stuff that you might happen upon, but sort of a little off kilter, right? Because it's and a little stiff. All the music was made using a sort of text-based computer environment called Super Collider, so there was no playing of instruments, there were no samples, there's no found material, everything was just typed, sort of specified. And so sometimes when I would make the things that sounded like music, I would tap out, this is a system I built for other reasons, but I would tap out the rhythm so they're kind of not very regular. So like that sort of like jaunty music, it's not rhythmically stable. It's slightly off. And then the singer is sort of AI singer, and so the whole thing has a kind of a slightly wrong. It worked happily, I think. Yeah, so it feels like sort of like, ooh, this is like some found library loop music. so there was that. And then Maura told me that she also needed themes for Switzerland and for Hong Kong. And for Switzerland, I kind of missed the mark a little bit, because I just thought, you know, we're doing money, we're just going to go, we're going to do Calvin, we're going to go pa, you know, and or like, well, we're looking at the Alps. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? I got to make it a little more ecstatic. But it was a little late, so that one's a compromise. And then for Hong Kong, it was really quite a challenge. So at first I thought, we'll do some protest songs, but no, we'll all be blacklisted of the show, we'll never get to go to China. So but I can't do anything I don't want to do anything rudely Chinese. You know, Hong Kong's a big city, we'll do trap music, you know. And I stole some lyrics from some actual Chinese pop music and had my robot singers sing it. So they're saying rose-colored champagne, which seems sort of appropriate. But and then the other thing that Maura asked me for was money, money, money. She said, she wants something for like when money's changing hands. And so I made a kind of a factory that can make different kinds of, it makes the same music at different speeds and in different places. So each time we go to black, we hear this kind of like disco kind of music. That's all just generated from, I give it a number for how fast to go and how long, you know, give it the start and stop numbers, and it'll start and stop. And then finally there's just the animations and all that, so that those are all just, again, sort of like functions. I just tell it where to start the drawing, where to end. I had to go, you know, click through to each frame and put the start frame and end frame, and then it draws the little thing. It goes or whatever it is. But one of the goals was to make it so this kind of, you feel like this sort of found music, or this sort of music like you might have in a video, but then it moves when Maura backs up and starts to have an argument. So we start with Picasso, he's like, la 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 Picasso, but then we start with Hong Kong, you know, it's just like, now we're in Hong Kong, it's travelogue music. But then Maura takes a step back and starts to discourse, right? And when it becomes discursive, then you start pushing the harmony and let the thing suddenly become kind of cinematic music. And I guess that's the ultimate goal, was kind of sort of strike a balance, because I just feel like when I first looked at it without music, for me it was like just kind of like fireworks. Like it was like I already knew the argument. I already knew what more sort of spiel in that regard. What I was responding to was just like the cutting and what happens with the imagery, and kind of for me the imagery is sort of ecstatic. And you know, super vulnerable. Maura gets up on the table, and kind of, you know, and it's a story about to my mind, as much about Maura, us, you know, as human beings. And so the trick is to not sort of break stride, not give away that it's not just a lesson, but let it be, and still have it be cinema. And sort of it's a kind of a weird halfway. You know, you kind of have to find a way to kind of a halfway place tonally. So hopefully I landed there.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to sit more?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's
does anyone have questions, ideas, thoughts? Please.
I'm trying to remember like some of the job shifts that you've had. Like you trained as a PI at some point. You're still teaching art in different places?
I do a lot of things. I'm still a PI. Yeah.
I was curious.
And also teach sometimes.
Like, has the research that you've just finished changed how you would talk to students about money if you're talking with new art students?
I always try to talk to students about money. I think that, probably I talk about it more now, you know, because I'm just thinking about it constantly. But who isn't thinking about it constantly, you know? So I try to talk to them about it. I feel like when I was in school, there was more money in the art world, I think, and people were making more money, and people were not talking about it as much. I feel like my students are way more sophisticated than I was, frankly, and just more skeptical, like much more skeptical. Yeah. I feel like we all thought we were 18. We're like, oh yeah, we're gonna make all this money, and no big deal, you know. I remember being in school and like being in crit, you know, I went to art school for undergrad, and like you could never say, oh, like I was making sculpture. You could never say like, oh, I made the sculpture this size because I ran out of money for materials. Like you had to pretend like that was the size, you know. Which is, you know, a kind of insanity. It's delusional. Yeah.
I'm curious to know how you landed on or developed the storytelling through your devices, like that. You know, in a way, like that's kind of how we all see the world, but it worked really well, and it was actually kind of felt more immersive than being removed.
Oh, isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about it. I'm kind of very sort of literal. So I was thinking of this as a table, and because a table is the space of accounting and money, that's where that happens. And so everything that, and so this was a story about trying to visualize the world of accounting, like Moneyland, and which is invisible and is basically a discursive space of legal structures. And so the rule was that everything that happened in the video had to happen on the table. And so the landscapes had to be shrunk down, to screens that would fit on the table. Or if I wanted to talk about me, I would have to get onto the table and enter the world of money. Yeah, so that's what that was about. But I also think it's like, this sort of abstract world which is at a remove, like everything is discourse. So you don't see anything directly.
Well, there's also like, it seems like it's a trick around having to do animations for everything, even though you can do animations and there are animations.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's sort of a way of like using the devices to kind of get you to that animated storytelling.
I feel very satisfied when I like scroll and it changes. Yeah, it's like a sort of cheap trick or something, Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Hey.
This one's more for you, Ben. What's your experience of selling the work? Like, as open as you wish in terms of...
We haven't sold the work.
Okay.
No, I mean...
What is it priced at?
This is 15,000.
Edition?
Yeah, edition of 3. Yeah. I mean, it takes a certain collector, I think, to be interested in this, right? I don't know that our space necessarily attracts the commercial collector, but I would say of anything this work really is about work being sold, right? So the question that I often get isn't so much as this is for sale, but did that work in the video actually get sold, or was this actually done? Is this real money laundering? That's kind of where I feel like I get a lot of the attention, a lot of the questions is like, how real is this? And I think that in itself is kind of showing that the video is doing its job, where it's like, you're not quite sure, is this video for sale? Is the work within the video for sale? Has it been sold? Like, is this what's real and what's fake? And for me, I think that's really been where I've seen most of the curiosity around, but no.
But just for the record, if you want to buy this.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
So because we have this great screen right now where we're learning about the made-up valuation of artwork.
Yeah.
So what was your calculus of developing a $15,000 price tag?
I let Ben do it.
So
I was
Ben-
like,
so what was,
Yeah, I mean, it was coincidentally actually roughly, edition of 3, getting close to how much this video costs to produce.
yeah,
Really.
it's actually about how much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's straight up what
That's
it
about
is.
it,
Yeah.
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 We should have asked for more.
We should. We can change it.
I heard it's like 20,000 now.
Yeah. Someone actually owns this.
Yeah.
Come talk to me. Yeah.
I noticed that the 4,000 turned into 5,000 something. Was that fictitious, or did you actually buy that piece?
Are you allowed to say what's real and what's not? This is what we'll say. Some of it is real and some of it is not real.
So secrecy is important to this guy.
Yeah.
For that 15 grand, do I get a flash drive with the video on it?
Yes,
or
you
Of course
do.
you
You
do.
do. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Front
For you
page
to
screen.
cuddle, to
Yeah,
hold
rotating
close at
screen
night.
for the-
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you see practices existing outside of the market? Do you or other artists do any of that sort of thing? That's what I'm trying to sort of pivot to, because I'm losing interest in this whole thing.
Yeah.
So even outside of that, do you think it's possible for art and creativity to exist if we're all, some people are inherently creative?
I do think people are inherently creative. I do think that I don't really believe in pure spaces. I don't think that's possible. I don't. being honest, I don't expect to sell this video. I don't make videos with the expectation of selling them. There's not a, robust market for video art. But I recognize that my showing of this video will be a line on my CV, and that'll get me another thing, and then I'll get maybe a job that pays better or something like that, right? So there are indirect ways that it makes money for me. And then also like the fact that, I'm probably not gonna sell this video is that's like, I'm an important cog in the machine, right? Like there has to be some artists who aren't selling videos so that like some other artists are, selling more of it, right? Like that's just how it works, right? So I don't think, I don't think it's possible to exist in a space outside of that. And I think it's a little, I don't know, like does it matter? Like in some ways, like you're gonna do what you're gonna do, like we're all making things for non-instrumental reasons for the most part. Like we're making things because we want to make them. And that's the most important thing I think to hang on to, and whether it's possible to be inside or outside of the market, I think is like kind of it's like a fool's errand. Yeah.
And I think to add on to that too, I mean the goal of Canary as a space in the future is one in which these types of works receive a commission, right? And so I think it's also about trying to build an ecosystem around that pursuit rather than expecting the artist to be the one who must either make something commercial or find a way of selling something that's so intangible, right?
Yeah.
Like to your point, yes, it's a flash drive, So this was never designed to be sold in the same way that like a commercial painting is, right? And so it's really about rethinking, what type of space are these works being shown and how are these spaces financially structured so that artists like Maura can make a living doing this.
I don't know if I can form this question correctly, but was there like other crimes where you're like, oh, we need to just focus on money laundering? Like, there's too many crimes you can get into. Because I just remembered a friend of mine was working for Sundance and was saying sometimes films get censored by being purchased. So if you, for example, were an oil company and a really good documentary was about to be distributed, there have been movies that were purchased so that it couldn't be shown.
Wow.
So technically, you could make good money by if any of the companies that didn't want to have their name in this, they would have to buy all three of them.
This is brilliant.
Just take away the censor bars.
Censorship normally helps artists' careers, but
Right.
it's you have to also be on people's radar as if.
Right.
They
I have to be a threat. Yeah.
Yeah.
It has to be it's artist blackmail basically.
Yes.
Yeah. That's an incredible business model.
Yeah, that's
I'm so intrigued.
I'm very intrigued too.
Coming soon.
Yeah.
This isn't so much a question, but I feel like the utility in charts and graphs is the information that they convey. And so I wanted to hear more about the voiding of information or the censoring of the charts in the back.
Oh yeah. Well, I guess
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
the question was we're interested in knowing about like the aesthetic of censoring and the kind of black boxes in the back, in the drawings in the back, which by the way, I made those drawings thinking like, I'm gonna make some drawings, maybe I'll sell something finally in this show. And then I made like the most unsellable drawings ever. So you can see the problem with being me. Yeah, I mean, I guess like, that just became a kind of reality of the piece is that it was very, very hard to get people to talk to me on the record. Really, really, really hard. I talked to a lot of people who said amazing things that I wish I could have put in the video, and they would love to talk to me, but they would not be. And then, the only person who went on the record for this video is Oliver, because he's a journalist and he doesn't give a shit, this is what he does. But, for anybody who's really involved in the art world in any kind of serious money way, it's not in their interest, even if they're angry and they hate the system, which almost everyone does. It's just not in their interest to be involved in anything with the word money laundering in it. So it became like, it had to become kind of an aesthetic within the film. And then I found Abigail's work, who was working with a redaction aesthetic. So I just kind of decided to double down on it. And I guess like, you know, there's probably a bigger thing to be said about like things that are invisible and things that are visible, right? And like the invisibility of the markets, and yeah, the logic of redaction. Yeah,
I have a similar question, which
Yeah.
was just that in earlier cuts that you didn't have the redaction.
Oh yeah, that's just because you got to see it.
Yeah, I was just curious if that was if those were legal considerations, if that was aesthetic after you bumped into Abigail's piece.
No, that was always a sort of legal. Yeah, that was Abigail's piece I found because I knew it was going to be a thing, and also I was like, the artwork itself, and maybe this goes to the question too, is like, what should the artwork be that's being bought and sold? Like, it has to be a kind of black hole or a void because the art is interchangeable, right? Like it could be anything, and so her work felt like appropriate thematically for that reason. Yeah.
It might be somewhat of a utopic kind of question, but considering that like art objects are clearly transmutational, like objects, like they are able to like kind of alchemize like finance. What do you think that like do you think that it could be in some way plausible that they could actually kind of do the reverse where redistribution could be possible through the vehicle of the art object itself, or can this architecture be kind of appropriated and co-opted towards like something a little bit more like, I don't know, not diabolical is my question. Like,
Yeah,
have you thought
of course. Art existed before capitalism, and it'll exist after.
No, I know, but I mean the actual process of laundering, like the mechanisms and
Could you
discovering it. Could you
do it in reverse or something?
Yeah. or like are there, I don't know, are these things that have kind of come up in sort of like looking at the actual structural mechanisms of the process?
Has there been a kind of opportunity to fuck things up? I don't know. I feel like the blackmail is the best idea.
Yeah.
Like there's something really
thinking
there.
all the different
Yeah.
ones.
It's a great idea.
Like, there's a lot of friends
Yeah.
who've said that, oh, well, I just racked up like $150,000 worth of student debt, but no one will go on the record with me when I interview them that they got a call from like the third company that bought their debt, and they paid them off in like $10K in cash. And I've heard 3 friends do this through like CalArts, and I'm like, well, why won't anyone just tell me how they did it if it's real? But I've heard from bankers this is true because artists are such bad investments that in the teeter-totter of like, will you ever pay your debt? If you can get any cash from an artist, that's amazing. That's better than zero. And then the other end of the teeter-totter is like medical students. But to the thing you're saying, you need a sucker at the other end of the utopian thing. So yes, like if we all bought shares in Maura's piece and it goes up from 50,000 to a lot, we could communally enjoy the money from it, but the problem is you still need the sucker who bought from that difference of the money. And then it's like, well, I have to find the right rube or con. And that reminds me of Jennifer Moon, who's trying to Scrooge people, where like the person enjoys being the person who spent that much money and realizes they need to like deal with their trauma and then be redistributing wealth willingly. But it still hasn't fully really
Yeah,
worked.
and then financial domination kind of.
Yeah, because there are DOMs that people have hired that like literally like your bank account is mine.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's artistic. That's really well done. Like the consent is there.
Well, should we call it a night?
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.